Welcome back to the Big Fish, Little Fish podcast. You are here with us, episode 21, here with my co-host, Teo Debres, and we have some really awesome topics and things that we'd like to discuss. It's been a while since our last podcast, but we are excited to get back into the fold, start chopping it up, and we also like to say we are approaching 7,000 followers on Instagram and 7,000 followers on TikTok. We're approaching 400 followers on YouTube. So we appreciate all of our YouTube long form people, as well as all of our short form people that are here for the first time.
Yeah, man. It's crazy that we're here. 21 episodes in. We just said, thinking back to 21 episodes ago, we had no idea what was happening, and 7,000 followers. And more importantly, we're having fun with it. I swear, for anyone that watches this podcast, I know we talk about a wide range of topics, but man, it does feel good to talk. And I hope, I don't know where this podcast is going, but I really do hope that the one takeaway it has is that people are more open for discussion. People are really thinking about topics that we bring up and things that they're in their life that we're not bringing up. They just start thinking more and conversating more, because if we don't talk, we're doomed. So I know we have a few things we're really interested in talking about today, some topics that we're actually been pretty excited for. We had a hiatus, a lot of life in between, but that's, I feel like, what we say after every time. Usually it's the world is different, but this time I feel like it's more we just had a lot going on, but I'm super excited to talk about it. So Miguel, what was the first topic you wanted to cover today?
So there's been a lot of talk about a new potential policy on the brink of changing, I would say, in my opinion, the tax code, as well as the way Americans invest, period. And it's called Unrealized Gains Tax. So there's been a lot of talk from certain administrations about what type of taxes they may or may not impose. So one of the things that's getting floated around a lot is unrealized gains. And for those of you who don't know, that is a very scary concept. And, I could break it down for you, but I think Teo would do a much better job of explaining some of those dangers of unrealized gains. I have my thoughts on it, some things that I think are detrimental because of these things. But Teo, you're very great at breaking down concepts. Why don't you break down this concept for us a little bit?
So maybe we start with talking about what is unrealized gains tax. Because if we're going to talk about the pros and cons, you have to know what it actually is. So essentially, is what it is saying is that the government wants to impose a tax on the increase in value of an asset that you've had. Now, it doesn't have to be sold for them to tax you on it. It's just if you bought something at one price, let's use stocks for example. If you bought a grouping of stocks at one price and it has increased in value, the difference between what you bought it at and what it's currently valued at, they want to tax a percentage of that amount.
So, for example, Teo, if a stock you bought at $100, show them an example of what that looks like.
Good idea. So let's use an example of what taxing unrealized gains looks like, right? So let's say you bought a stock at $100, right? And now it's worth $150. You have $50 of unrealized gains. It's gained $50, but you haven't realized it because you haven't sold it yet. So yes, the asset is worth more, but you haven't received those $50 in your pocket. Now, the problem is what an unrealized gains tax is saying that, hey, your thing is worth more than $50 more or $50 more. We need a percentage of that. The government wants to have some of your earnings up front. Now, I have some problems that I see with that, but any initial knee-jerk reactions as to maybe that might not be the best idea ever.
Well, let me ask you one question.
Sure.
Do you even have $100 million?
If you don't know, there's a great meme going around. It's a video or reel about that, but we won't even get into that.
So you don't have $100 million?
No, but it still impacts me.
Oh, okay. I was just making sure. What was the question you asked?
What are some initial problems you could see with what that is? Like unrealized gain tax. That's what we're talking about. Do you have any pros of it? If you had to give some pros, maybe we start with the pros of why they would even suggest something like this.
The pros are so ridiculous, I'm not even going to name them because I see zero pros. I see zero pros except for the government getting some money. And I don't care what anyone says. The government does a terrible job in allocating our funds already. Everyone is in agreement of this. It wouldn't change anything in terms of government spending. It wouldn't fix the deficit. And the cons outweigh the pros to such a level that I won't even grace trying to go down the pros because it's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. It is possibly the most stupid policy anyone could have ever imagined. I mean, like, you can argue communism has some very flawed problems. I think unrealized gains is deep communism. I think it's like level 5, a top tier boss level policy in terms of just like how stupid it is. Like, can you imagine if this is something that's applied across the board? Like the government finds out you have Pokemon cards that are minted, and they're like, oh wow, you have to pay some tax on that because you bought it at $100, but now they're worth a few thousand if you sold them. Like, what? What are we talking about? And then what? Now we have to start giving the government. Now we have to take the government's consideration of what things are valued at. Like, the government doesn't do a good job of evaluating it. Even now, they don't do a great job with evaluating properties today. They have no idea, like in just real estate, they have no idea if a home has been updated, if it would actually sell for the prices that they're giving out to real estate. They're just taking a very good, quote unquote, good opinionated value, but they have no idea. How many times do you see what something is valued on a tax record versus what it's actually sold for on the open market? We're just talking about real estate. Can you imagine them trying to apply that to everything? If they try to apply it to cars, to very niche antiques, if they try to apply it to, like I said, like a Pokemon card or anything that could potentially have value, like something a collector would collect because they think it has intrinsic value. If you're a big sneakerhead, you purchase sneakers because you think, oh, over time, these Jordans are going to be costing way more. Or if you have a signed Michael Jordan Bulls jersey, right? Like, obviously, you're going to be able to sell it for a lot more than what you originally purchased it once it has an athlete's signature. Once you have that athlete signature, the value of it skyrockets. But the opinion of the government might think you can get for it and what you could actually get for it could be so different, and you're getting taxed what they think. What if they're taxing you for way more? And then it goes, especially if it's applied across the board, it can get so wonky. It makes no sense. It's so stupid.
I couldn't agree more. I'll say what the counter argument is, and you joked about it, but as of right now, everyone who hears that is going to say, oh, they're not going for these types of things. They're only going for the ultra wealthy on specific asset classes, so you don't have to worry about it. But I think that when that might be their counter argument now, but separately than that, do you ideologically believe that that's the role of government? Is government supposed to be taxing its people enough to the point where then it starts saying, hey, on your earnings of things, you may not have even sold it yet, but on an increase in value, we deserve a piece of that. It's like a fundamental concept to me that I'm trying to understand is, why do people think the government has any role in that at all? Like, do we ever just look around and be like, maybe the government's a little too involved in too many things, and especially trying to dip their hands in our pockets for things that haven't even gone to our pockets yet. Like, to me, that's the sign of a pretty aggressively taxing government when they're like, your income tax isn't enough. Your car sales tax isn't enough. Your regular sales tax isn't enough. Your house tax isn't enough. We now need to start taxing things that you've invested in that have gone up in value, even though you haven't sold it, so you don't get to realize that. We want a piece of that now, too. Like, at what point is enough? Like, I really don't get it. It's like, I wish people would just close their eyes for a second and think about this topic. Like, do you think the problem here is that there are wealthy people who haven't paid taxes on their increase in wealth? Or is the problem that the government is so desperate to get money in its hand that it is going everywhere it can in every aspect of every American's life and saying, we're going to tax you somehow, some way? Now to the point of, I want your taxes on things you haven't even made money on yet. Like, when is enough? To me, it's like obvious. The problem isn't that the government's not getting enough in taxes. The problem is that the government's spending too much. The government isn't under tax funded. That's not the problem in America. The problem is, why do they need so much of our taxes, and what are they doing with that money? I don't know about you, but if we can get to a point where we don't have to get taxed as much because the government's more tax efficient, I'm happy with that result. I'm not looking to the government to be like, hey, you need to do more stuff out here. Take my money. Let's get this thing going. I'm like, hey, can you fix the stuff you're already doing? Cut some expenses? Do the job for a little bit less? You really need more from me? Like, I don't know, man. It's like everywhere you look, tax here, tax here, tax here. What is not taxed?
Yeah, and I also want to point out the logistical pain in the ass this is going to create for whatever, wealthy, middle class, whoever it affects, because I'm very, very skeptical to think that this is only going to affect the wealthy, right? But that being said, think about if this gets applied across the board, how many people are going to have to every year, on top of the taxes you're already dealing with, have to be like, okay, this, when I bought it, was this amount, and now it's worth this amount, but last year it was worth less, or it was worth more. Now I got to figure out, okay, do I get depreciation? Do I get any tax incentives for like how much I've lost in value? And then what about people who they made an investment for the point of to build wealth? Slight technical difficulties, but as I was saying, millennials have only been investing probably for the last 5 to 10 years. So we're talking about a generation that everything is already a lot more difficult for us in terms of inflation, in terms of housing prices. And now we're talking about imposing unrealized gains to a group of people who are already having to have some of the biggest, we're dealing with one of the biggest economical crises in America, in American history, probably since, the Great Depression, and there have been some other recessions as well. But we're dealing with a time where it is so difficult to purchase a home, and now we're going to start throwing in unrealized gains like that. I mean, it's insane. I think one of the other difficult things that I was just thinking on top of this is when we're talking about how wonky it could get, I can just see a lot of people, especially if they're not financially savvy, dealing with double taxation, where they've been taxed at a rate 1 year and then taxed a different rate or another comparable rate the next year, right? Like we're talking about a field day for accountants trying to figure out how much stuff you have that, has increased in value. And I would also say this tax would also incentivize people to start committing tax fraud. And the reason I say that is because like committing fraud when it comes to taxes can be an accident. Sometimes you make a mistake, like you can make a mistake like not declaring some cash that you got on accident. Maybe you genuinely didn't remember to declare, or maybe you didn't, you filed something wrong because your accountant wasn't very much aware. But regardless, you have to deal with that problem. Now, if you're throwing unrealized gains, what if for some reason you get audited? And how are they going to audit that? Would they come to your home to see your stuff? They come to your home and they see some piece of china and they're like, oh my gosh, this china's worth a lot. You didn't know. You bought it at a garage sale for $12, but they're like, this is worth a few $1,000s. Have you ever declared this? Have you ever declared this Michael Jordan jersey with a signature? How much you buy it for? $80? Oh, this is worth $3,000 in our estimation. We think you could sell this for $3,000. Is that what we're going to have to start doing to audit people's stuff? The government's going to start coming to your house and see how much stuff do you have? And you might think, oh, that's silly. Why would they do that? They've never done that. They've never taxed unrealized gains. How would they enforce that? The only way to enforce that is to come to your house, to look at all of your stuff and start picking out, what is this worth? What is that worth? Is your car really not worth X amount? Is your house really not worth X amount? We think it's worth X amount. Oh, there's an extra bedroom here. Oh, you didn't tell us about that. You didn't tell us about the bathroom. You didn't tell us you have 20 Jordans. Oh, you got this Jordan as a gift? Well, you still have to declare it's unrealized. We didn't know. Right? How else would you enforce an unrealized tax gain? There's no other way. And I'll tell you what, as much as they're going to tax you on unrealized gains, they're going to be hard dragging their feet to let you declare like some type of unrealized loss. I bet that'll be much more difficult to figure out. How many unrealized losses, if they even let you do unrealized loss? What if you're like, hey, my house isn't worth anything. I have I have a huge problem with the home. The home has latent defects. It's not gonna be worth X amount this year. And is that going to be a lot? All of a sudden, everyone's saying there are latent defects with their house, right? Are people going to start saying there's latent defects with their cars? And now we're going to start getting into the government arguing with you. Be like, no, your house is fine. Your house is fine. We don't care about the asbestos. The house is fine. We don't care that your house leans a little bit. You could still sell it. And you're like, no, I couldn't. My realtor said he won't sell. And now you're going to be arguing with them over the dumbest things. They're arguing with you about taking your money for stuff you haven't sold. What if you never sell your house? What if you die before you sell it? Or you die before you sell your car? Or you die before you sell your shoes? You die before you sell that Michael Jordan jersey? Like, that's crazy. I understand taxing things when you actually make the money. Taxing theoretical money is like a new level of government bureaucracy, government tyranny, new level of government tyranny, stealing your unearned money. Our investments all throughout school, they're like, hey, invest. And now they're like, let me get that investment. Let me get a little bit of that money. Let me get some cheddar off the top of that. Our whole lives, if you've been learning about finances in your 20s and 30s, so you're trying to build up for retirement, build up for your kids' savings fund, you've been like, save and invest. Save and invest. They already tax you on any interest you make on your savings account past a certain amount. Now you have investments that you've been very, very consistently and in a disciplined manner been saving and not using, right? Let's say you have a 401k. Oh, 401ks. Is that on the table too? Unrealized gains, 401ks? Like, when does it end? They told us to get the 401ks. They told us to get the IRA Roth. They told us to invest in the S&P 500, right? And now they're like, I want that. I don't care that you haven't sold it. I don't care that you haven't spent that money on things. Now, why would we save and invest this hard? For the people that do have the money to save and invest, why would you save and invest as hard if the government's getting a piece of it before you can even make money? That's insane. It's the dumbest thing. That's what I'm saying. This is worse than any communist policy I think I've ever seen. This is worse. Because at least with those things, it's like, across the board, there was never a lie. It was like, you're only going to make a certain amount, period. You don't even have to worry about it like that. Now it's like communism with a capitalist mask. And everybody knows the mask is on. Well, not everybody. Some people can never figure it out. Some people, they almost figure it out, but they're just not there. And they might never get there. But it's just a mask. If this isn't communism, it's something worse. If this policy comes to light, in my opinion, and you know what? We're going to talk about this a little later. But if the founding fathers knew you were going to tax unrealized gains, bro, they were throwing tea into the ocean because of a few taxes. If they were like, we're going to tax you on stuff you don't even have, bro, they would have not just done a revolution. They would have invaded Britain. They would have burned it to the ground, dude.
Yeah, this is honestly, it's a bit terrifying. We're at a point in time where this is even for discussion. Like, if you had asked me back in the day if that would ever be even possible in America, I'd be like, no way in America they're ever going to propose taxing unrealized gains. You'd have to be so far off the cuckoo nest to think that that's even a legitimate option that it'll never come to light. It's honestly preposterous. And the fact that now it's not seen as preposterous, but as a viable solution to problems, I don't understand. I don't see the same world that other people see if that's a way you could see this being a real solution. If you see unrealized gains being something that should be taxed, I don't ideologically understand how you can arrive at a place like that. I know the reasons they say are the pros there, but you have to overlook so many invasions of privacy on you as a human being for the government to get that deep into your life that, like, what pros? Even if it does help fund the government, even if it does help fund the government, even if it does do all the things it says that it can do, that's the 3,000 solution that we should be putting into place. There are about 3,000 things I would say is smarter and a better way to get to a solution than taxing unrealized gains. And they're saying that's the first thing we need to do. I even looked at the numbers. I looked at the numbers on it. The numbers don't make sense. It's so stupid. They said, if you do this unrealized tax gain, because the whole thing is that it's not on everybody, it's on the wealthy over a certain amount of net worth and their unrealized gains and all that. So what the policy that's being proposed right now would generate over a 10-year period $360 to $500 billion. That is this solution that the government has thought up and said, this is a really good idea. If we do this, we can get $360 to $500 billion over 10 years. They're like excited about this idea. The U.S. budget has us spending $6.2 trillion a year. So for the math, if you break that down, if you take all of the money that this idea is supposed to make, so you're saying, hey, we're going to do unrealized tax gains, and over 10 years, we're going to make $500 million. If you make $500 million, that funds for about 8% of 1 year's budget. 1 year's budget would be funded, which is 8% of the budget. Wait, that's not right. If you did all of that $500 million and you applied it on the $6.2 trillion annual budget, you get 8% of your budget paid for.
500 million, 500 billion.
Billion.
Yeah, 500
because
billion.
it's 6.2 trillion.
Yeah, you said million, just 500 billion.
Regardless, all it funds is 29 days of the government, based on the math I did. If they do this over 10 years, the money they make over 10 years would fund the government for 29 days in 1 year. Not every year. 29 days in 1 year. It doesn't make mathematical sense. It risks the economy because, okay, so you're going to start taxing unrealized gains. What do you think is going to happen? You think all of those uber wealthy people are just going to be like, all right, yeah, take a percentage of the money I haven't even really made yet? No. This whole system's going to change. I can guarantee you this. If you start taxing unrealized gains on certain asset classes, the billionaires of the world will put their money in other asset classes. There is no way that you are going to be able to impose this stupid policy that doesn't make sense in the first place on the billionaires. I guarantee you it. And all that's going to end up happening is they're going to trickle it down, and the next thing you know, the average everyday person is going to start paying this stupid tax that doesn't make sense, and the billionaires will have avoided it. You're creating a policy that's not enforceable and eventually is going to get down to the common people, and it's just another burden on the backs of regular, real people. It's stupid. It's so stupid. I can't understand how they get here. I've thought through it. I was like, how are you saying this out loud in a room and not worried people are going to say you're an idiot? But then you're saying this is the policy that we want to bring forward? It doesn't make any sense. It's financially and fiscally so anti-capitalism. I can't believe it. Like, if you even think you're remotely capitalist, you cannot support this policy. You have to be something other than capitalist to think this is a good idea. I don't know what you are, but you're not a capitalist. You're a social. I don't know what you are, but I guarantee you one thing. If you want to tax unrealized gains, if you ideologically support unrealized gains tax, you do not truly believe in capitalism. You believe in something else. So don't call yourself a capitalist.
And you'll still have Bernie Sanders being like, we're going to make them pay their fair share. He'll literally look you guys in the face and be like, oh yeah, unrealized gains, that's going to fix it. Like, Bernie, the billionaires have been beating you, bro. You have not won no billionaire battles. There are as many billionaires. There are more billionaires right now than when you started in office. Your battle against the billionaires hasn't won. And I'm not trying to hate on you. I'm just being honest. If you are on this wave where you're like, oh yeah, unrealized tax gains, and I'm not 100% sure if he's on it, but if I were at the casino and if I was at the casino, I had to bet whether he was or wasn't on it, I bet he'd be like, oh yeah, we got to make them pay their fair share. Brother, you haven't made them pay their fair share at all. You have not done that. We have more billionaires.
I really don't know if the people who support it understand how it works. I mean, I that's how confused I am. I'm not trying to be like funny or any of that. I think that if you support unrealized gains tax, you may not actually understand how money works in America. Like, you might just be hearing the words and being like, oh yeah, we get money from the billionaires and give it to the government to help other people. But I don't think you actually understand how that process works. And if you think, Why do people, everyone complains that the government's inefficient. Everyone says the government's doing a terrible job. Whether you're on the left or the right, it doesn't matter. You're complaining about something about the government, right? Why is the solution for anyone, let's find ways to give the government more money? That's not the solution. I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. Giving the government more of our money is not fixing the problems with the government that we all can agree on. It's not the solution. Let's focus on those. And then, if you think that this is a good idea, read a capitalism book or an economics book or something to educate yourself, and then realize that that's just the government getting their hands in our pockets. Why do we want the government to take our money? I don't understand it. There are certain functions that can be funded by it. But if you're telling me we need to do all of these different techniques to take money out of our pockets in every aspect of our life, to be able to get those services the government's providing, the government's not doing a good job. I genuinely think a government that can do more with less is what we should all be aspiring for. If we could have a government that is doing just as much as the current government's doing now, if not more, for less money, that's what we should be trying to figure out. And this whole let's tax more, let's tax more, let's tax more, it's not the solution. Let's tax Americans less and make the government spend less.
I agree. And I guess, and I don't mean to beat this home with more of the same, but like for the average person who's just trying to get ahead and let's say you're at the very beginning of your investment journey and trying to build a better life. Like, I don't know if you realize like most of the assets you're getting that are going to increase in value, they're not liquid. You know what I mean? Like if you buy a house and you spend a majority of your savings purchasing that home, now like you have the home, but you might be lower on funds. Well, then next year, if your home appreciates, let's just say, I think it's 3% homes usually appreciate, but lately they've been appreciating a lot more than that. Let's say they appreciated like 10%. Like you're on the hook for that. And it's not like you can sell your house to pay your taxes right away, right? And therein lies the problem. Let's say you bought the house for $500K. You put most of your savings into purchasing that home. And then the tax bill comes the next year. And according to the government, they're like, oh, based off of our resources, your home's worth $515,000. Can you pay us that difference? And you're like, dude, I just bought my first house. You're going to tax me on that? And let's say for some crazy reason, all of a sudden you turn around, you're like, I have to sell this house. I don't have the money between my life bills. And now all of a sudden this big tax coming my way. I got to sell this house. What if you sell it for less than $500,000? What if for some reason, not that the government's ever been wrong or anything, you couldn't sell it for $515,000? So now you're not just not able to pay back your original mortgage. It's not like you're still going to have really the capital to pay that tax bill. And I mean, that's a little more of an exaggerated example, but that could happen with anything that's not liquid, right? Like a car, some people consider an asset, some people consider it a liability, but let's just pretend it's an asset. Like, that's not liquid. Stocks, you can make it liquid, but it's not supposed to be treated as liquid if you're a long-term investor, right? Like, I mean, it's just like the whole premise of investing, generally speaking, is to get non-liquid things that appreciate over time, whether that's stocks, real estate, gold, niche collectible items. The unrealized gains are going to annihilate the whole premise of investing in America. And you know what? If you're a millennial, you got to think about it. Like, who are making these policies? It's that boomer generation. They're over here making these policies. They're going to ruin our generation and the generation after us and our kids, right? What are we supposed to tell our kids on how to build wealth? What we were told is to get assets, invest in assets. Well, you're destroying the investment when you're creating unrealized gains. What are we supposed to tell the next generation? We can't honestly tell kids like, yeah, invest in real estate, invest in stocks, invest in this, because we're going to start seeing, damn, it's not worth the squeeze. Now, if you're an investor who evaluates a stock or real estate investment on a spreadsheet where you're looking at income, expenses, cash flow, depreciation, appreciation. Well, now you got to factor in unrealized gains, which is going to be so hard to evaluate because you never know how stupid the government is at evaluating these things.
And kind of actually focusing on one of the points you brought up, which is we brought this up in one of our earliest podcasts, but we were talking about the average age of senators and how crazy it is that we have so many old politicians in government right now. And everyone's like, oh, yeah, that's the problem. But like when you really find the heart of the problem of that, an politician who has been in politics for 30 years and is old and towards the end of their life does not have the same priorities or perspective as someone else who actually is still part of the real world and is someone who actually is thinking about their life as if they have to provide for themselves or their family. These people have been they've been in politics so long that they've built their net worths by 100x, and they're old and they don't have to worry about retirement. They don't have to worry about how they're going to be financially stable. They've been corrupt politicians for 30 years. So what do you think happens when that goes on? Their policies that they think of and they create have nothing to do with what we care about anymore. They've been so far out of the real world for so long that they're making up policies as a game. And that's the problem. Half of these people in here are making stupid policies up right now, like unrealized gains tax, because they don't realize that long term that's only going to impact the people that need to be protected the most. They're just playing a game of like, well, maybe this will work. You don't play a game with people's lives. You don't introduce policies that are this risky. That's so dumb. And on the second front, I was thinking about this. So we're talking about unrealized gains tax. Let's say they do it, right? They do it. It works out. They make all this money. They take all the money, right? Okay, then they start taking more and more from the people. So the government's going to be there for you when times are up, when asset classes are up. But inevitably, like everything in life, they will be down. What is the government going to do? Are we going to all be able to turn back around to the government and say, hey, you know what? Things are really bad. I can't pay my mortgage anymore. I can't pay my car note. Never once has the government stepped in those types of times and said, you're good on that. They don't do that. That's not going to be their role. In 2008, there was millions of bankruptcies across the country, and it was because the government wasn't backing them. They were like, hey, you made a bad financial purchase. You have to deal with the ramifications of it. And a lot of people's lives were ruined or significantly set back because of that. So if the government's going to be there all the time when times are good, and they're not there when the times are bad, what type of government is that? To me, that's the type of government that's lining their own pockets, and they actually don't care about their people. Their people are only as good as the times are for them. If times are good, they're there and they're in their people's lives. And when times are bad, the government's not there. They're like, figure it out. This is a capitalist country. We can't back you for everything. I want to have that same energy when times get bad in America. Help us pay those food bills. Is that what you want? Is that what people want? Is the government taking from us on the good and then giving to us on the bad? Well, guess what? That's socialism. That's not what I want. I want the government out of it and let us do what we need to do.
And in 2008, when that was going on, when we made all those financially bad decisions and a lot of people lost their homes, my family, including we were one of them, you know who they did bail out? The banks, the corporations, the people they say, oh, we want to make sure we tax them the right way. They're in bed together, okay? People need to stop having the naive thought that any time a new tax is proposed from the government, it's going to benefit us. It's never going to benefit us. Like we were just talking about, like, oh, do you think billionaires are really going to stand for getting like unrealized gains tax done on them? No. All their investments, and here's another thing. This is another thing that would happen. Prediction. All their investments would go from America to the Cayman Islands. Or anywhere else where there's not doink unrealized gains, because they're not stupid. Any billionaire is going to look at the tea leaves and be like, why would I do that? And you know what that would do? Look at your 401k, plummet. Look at your real estate, plummet, because they're going to be selling all of their LA, New York, Florida, like anywhere where they have real estate, sold, gone. And you know where they're going to buy? They're going to buy, just name a country that does not have unrealized gains tax. That's where they're going. So we're talking about real estate. We're talking about stocks. We're talking about, we can say collectible items, art, whatever you want to say. I wouldn't even be surprised if it's cash too. They're switching their cash for euros. They're switching their cash for colones. They're switching their cash for pesos. They're switching their cash for what is the Japanese one?
Yen.
They're going to be switching up. Everything will leave. But you know who's going to be stuck holding the bag? You, me, him. Everybody who's American is going to be holding the bag. Every normal American who doesn't have the financial savvy to sell all of their assets here and invest it over there. But you know what they'll do then? Foreign unrealized gains tax. That's what they'll start doing. They'll be like, the billionaires, somehow they got us again. I don't know how they got us. We need to start taxing foreign unrealized gains tax. That'll be the new ploy. 2032. Okay, guys. I know unrealized gains tax didn't work. And we'll be like, well, can we undo it? And they'll be like, no, we can't undo it. Sorry. They'll be like, but foreign unrealized gains. They're just going to tax other countries. They're going to start calling other countries on the phone and be like, can we please see the asset class of our citizens? Like the level of disincentivization of not just investing in America, like American assets for normal people, but like the billionaires that everybody complains about, they're not going to invest in here either. And newsflash for all you people who hate billionaires, if they're not investing in the 401k that you have, watch it plummet. Because a lot of what's holding up the stock market, spoiler alert, is some billionaires and their companies. You think those companies are going to keep investing in themselves? If you thought that 2000 to 2010 era where companies were sending their factory jobs overseas was bad, we're going to see a stampede of companies moving from America to the international market. You're going to see a stampede.
They have no incentive to stay.
No.
Let's paint this scenario. Let's say it is a bunch of, we all hate the billionaires and they're a bunch of evil people and we need to start taxing them. But they've been avoiding taxes based on the tax system the U.S. has created. What makes you think this will be any different? And to your point, if they leave, they are the shareholders of the things they want to tax. So if they have to sell those assets off, it's going to be a free-for-all. The market would plummet. Literally there wouldn't be any buyers. Because who's the buyer? The billionaires. The billionaires own 30, 40, 50% of these companies. And if they have to all of a sudden, because of some stupid policy like unrealized gains tax, have to now liquidate some of those assets to either be able to pay it or they want to get out of the game altogether, well, guess what? Down goes the price. And unless you and everyone else has enough capital to buy 50% of Amazon, which is like $3 trillion total valuation, where's that $1.5 trillion of value coming back into the market? It's leaving. Who's buying it? I don't know enough people in America to be able to buy up that amount of shares to keep the value propped up. It's like they don't understand how money works. I'm telling you, if you are, I swear on my life, if you are for taxing unrealized gains, you literally don't understand how economics work. It's the only conclusion I can come to. You don't understand how the economy and the market work. And you think that you're so theory-based that you don't understand how people work, and a person, especially a billionaire, is going to do what they can to avoid taxes. And when a billionaire avoids paying unrealized gains taxes, I guarantee you this, there will be something that happens that impacts all of us negatively. And we're all going to go back looking to the government and being like, hey, you said this was a good idea, and they're not going to have a good response for us. It is so stupid, and we are so silly for even entertaining this as the people of America. Maybe a few crazy people out there do want to tax unrealized gains as politicians, and they propose that policy. But us as Americans need to come back, understand how it works, and be like, this doesn't make sense. This is dumb. Do not do this. This will cause major economic problems and is not going to give you the benefit you think you're going to get. And the benefit you think you are going to get is not really the problem anyway. We have bigger problems in spending than we do in capturing unrealized gains.
And I would also say this just because I want to ask our few followers that actually listen to us a serious question. Do you trust the government to fix the deficit? Take that same mindset and ask yourself, do you trust the government to figure out your unrealized gains? I don't. I don't either. They're never going to fix anything.
I don't have a high confidence on them on either of those topics. I don't think the government's going to slow down spending, and I don't think the government's going to efficiently be able to assess the values of what they need to have a even somewhat effective unrealized gain tax. It's so dumb. It's so dumb. I can't even articulate good thoughts sometimes because I'm like, it's so dumb. It's one of the dumbest things. You said it. Unrealized gains tax is one of the dumbest ideas I've ever heard of. It is so dumb in so many ways that I don't know how it's even having as much chatter as it does. I don't know why we're talking about it. I have no idea why I'm talking about unrealized gains tax right now.
We hate unrealized gains tax so much that we've talked almost a full episode about unrealized gains.
We need to move on.
And you know what? Let me just end it on this note. It's very tyrannical. It is so tyrannical that I think Tail just needs to... I think Tail needs to give us 5 signs of a tyrannical government right now.
All right. We were talking about this, and we were like, what are our topics? So I'm not going to go tyrannical. I'm going to go corruption because I think that's a little bit more relevant in today's day. So and before you freak out, this isn't about any one country. These are just the general top 5 signs you have a corrupt government. Number 1, the government uses its positions for personal gain. And that might sound familiar, but historically, when governments get into power, they use that position of power to actually gain their net worth, to gain their influence, to gain their status, and it is something that's different than what it's intended to be, which is, hey, serving the people, right? So, when you start having that, you have to think about what does that look like? And how does that actually come about? Government officials are then getting into positions where they can utilize the position of power they have to influence people to either act a certain way or to pay them certain amounts of money. And then they just play the game. And if you have someone who isn't of a high moral framework, they're not going to actually be able to withhold themselves from all the temptations of the position, and then you start seeing it. And if you're looking around and you see a politician who comes in with one net worth and leaves with another and the other's really higher, maybe you should think about what were they doing during their time in office? How did they get that type of money? Should they be getting an increase in net worth at all? Just some general questions to think about. And I think that once you have those people in that position, they never want to leave. So that really is something you need to understand is if your government is using their position of power to gain wealth, they're not going to want to leave, so they'll be there longer. Just a sign, no matter where you are in the world, if that's a possibility, you might have a corrupt government. Number 2, the government has a suppression of dissatisfaction with them or free speech. Very often, you can look in history, governments have taken very drastic steps to make sure that either people don't speak poorly about the government or people just don't speak at all. I mean, you can look around the world right now and see some really good examples of governments where people aren't allowed to express their thoughts or people aren't allowed to express that they're dissatisfied with their government. So when you're thinking about your life, how freely do you feel to speak about the things that are going on? How freely do you feel that you can share your ideas? How freely do you feel that you can say, hey, the government's not doing a good job, they should improve upon this? I think if you start to see signs where steps are taken to restrict that, that's a really bad sign of where they're going. Because why are they so upset with hearing about their own performance reviews? Also, taking it that step further, sometimes it starts with stopping them with speaking certain things. And then it's people stop gathering in certain places. And then it's people stop being able to kind of express their thoughts in a room. And when you see that, that's a state of a government that's now suppressing any sort of insurrection or things like that, which you don't want insurrections, but what you do want is to be able to have freedom of speech. So there's a delicate balance you have to have, right? But at the same time, people need to have the right to speak, and the government shouldn't be stopping that. So the second sign is if you feel like you're not able to express your thoughts, probably a state where you're not in the freest society. Number 3, the overtaxation combined with the misuse of public funds. I think when you have a government that wants more and more of your money and they're doing a poorer and poorer job with what they're using that money for, that's a pretty corrupt government. Are they spending money in the places that the people want the money to be spent? Something to consider. Is the money they're spending achieving the goals that they say it should be achieving? Another way to see how they're doing it. And eventually, there is a time where you need to look around and say, hey, I am actually a citizen of this country. You guys aren't using my money correctly. start using it better. There has to be accountability. And if they don't care enough, or they keep doing it and they get bigger and bigger and more bloated as a government, that just means they're making more and more money. It's not because they're doing a better job for you. People need to start understanding that just because the government's spending more money doesn't mean it's doing a better job for you. Number 4, the control of media and use of propaganda. When you look at societies over time, once they start trying to tell you what you should be thinking and influencing what you see, the government now is impacting your reality. They're starting to say, we get to tell you what reality is. And I think a corrupt government will tell you things that aren't actually true. I think a honest and true government allows you to see the world. They want you to have transparency around. They want you to see what's going on and to be actively involved in the society. And when the government starts telling you how to be a part of a society and what you should be thinking in a society, they're taking away from your freedoms. Probably a pretty corrupt group that would want to do that. And lastly, the judicial system is no longer being fair and unbiased. I think if you start to have a situation where a country, the judicial system, starts getting influenced by the politicians or influenced by the government, they are not giving you an open and fair trial. And everyone deserves the right to a fair trial. And when the government starts being able to use the judicial system to impose actions on its people, or let people off that shouldn't be let off, or give punishments to people who shouldn't be punished, your government's probably pretty corrupt at that point, and they're using the judicial system to have power over you. And there's a bonus one. Number 5A or 6 bonus one is election fraud. I think when you start to see the government involving themselves in elections, it's a very bad sign that they no longer want there to be free and open elections that are fair. So things to think about. Now, I had about 10 more, so comment if you want to hear some more, maybe a top 10 list, but these are the top 5 that I said. Any thoughts or reactions on that?
No, those are good. And, we don't even have to go into detail on which countries do or don't do those things. I think there are plenty of people who are honest about, at least in America, who are honest about where these things go on, and sometimes can even self-reflect about if those things do or don't happen here. And I think being able to look at these problems is definitely so important for the average American citizen. I think especially if we want to keep the integrity of our rights and the ability to have true freedom, we have to understand our rights and what is a tyrannical government. Because I think that is something that's missing in America for a lot of Americans. They have no idea what a tyrannical government is. They just kind of take governments as face value. They're just like, over here, I can do this. Over there, I can't. And they don't ever really think about, should I be allowed to do this? Is this a good thing? Should the government stop this from happening? And sometimes the lines can get blurred and there is gray area to things. But there definitely has to be a line in the sand at times to stop the government from overimposing in your life. People need to really look at the history of so many governments around the world and historically. The reason typically there has been government overthrowing and civil wars and major upheavals has been because of tyranny, has been because of governments in almost, it's hard to say intentionally because sometimes I don't know if it's intentional or if it's just incompetence, but they're creating huge levels of inequities between the top and the bottom, and sometimes leaving no room for middle class. And that a lot of times creates uncertainty and changes in political equilibrium. And it can happen anywhere in the world. And it has happened all over the world.
And before anyone gets upset, when I went over this list, I actually was using other countries as examples or other regimes as examples for what to avoid. The U.S., I think we look at what other countries have done wrong, and we use that as an example of, hey, let's avoid these things. The U.S. is a lot better than a lot of places in the world on those topics. I think that that's what makes America one of the greatest countries, the greatest country, is that it has set up a system that doesn't permit these things. Then when they thought through these things, it's actually interesting. If you want a great read, I highly, highly recommend. It's called Rules by Which a Empire May be Reduced to Small. No, it's called Rules by which a great empire may be reduced to a small one. And it was written by Benjamin Franklin in 1773. He covers, and this is from 1773's perspective, what he thought Britain was doing, and he kind of used them as general rules. And I think it's really true. It almost should be like a guideline of things that we should always be watching out for and always be cautious of. Because just because America's set up in a way that's great, that doesn't allow those things to come easily, we still need to actively be working against them trickling into our system. You never want any of these corrupt dynamics in your country. And again, America's not immune from them. We're just set up to prevent them. So we do have to take part, and we do have to make steps to make sure that if we notice any one of these going in a wrong direction, we stop it before we become like some of these other countries where they are put in these positions. I never want to be losing my free speech. America's known for being a country of free speech. I don't want a tyrannical judicial system. Other countries have the judicial system that's used against them. Like, America's is supposed to be the guiding light for a lot of these things, and I think that a lot of them we're still good on, but we need to always be giving ourselves a test of, are we going the right direction or the wrong direction on these topics?
Yeah, I agree.
Now, I heard you had a top 5 list.
So,
a little different than mine. What's yours?
I wouldn't say necessarily top 5, but I would say 5 examples of events where people stood against tyranny. And we'll start at the top. We'll start here at home. But like I said, 5 examples of people standing against tyrannical governments. So number 1, the Boston Tea Party. So the Boston Tea Party in America, it's a very famous event. Essentially, the colonists all over, all the colonists were starting to get fed up with Britain's rule. But in Boston particularly, the Stamp Act had made people very upset. They were taxing stamps, and stamps at that time were crucial for communication and all types of like serious documentation. But the Stamp Act was something that upset the colonists. There was also the Tea Act, which created like a big disruption in the pricing of tea, as well as what would be used by the colonists. And essentially that and a few other things on top of the Townshend Act, the proclamation of 1763, which was basically restricting the colonists' expansion to the West, which for a lot of colonists at that time were banking on being able to go in that direction. Long story short, the colonists in Boston were fed up. They threw so much tea into the harbor. It really sparked the conflict between America and Britain, and it is one of the most essential events in American history, especially at the beginning, that shaped the way we're supposed to view taxation without representation, as well as tyrannical government rule. So that's number 1. Number 2 is, and this one I've butchered the name a few times, but I'm going to do my best. Number 2 is the Tiananmen Square protest. So the Tiananmen Square protest, that was a bunch of people in China, but specifically a lot of college students who were essentially standing up to China's government for a lot of inequities, political corruption. They were upset over and it's funny because you were talking about it. There was a lot of censorship going on, and there's still censorship in China today. But essentially, there was a huge protest over it, and it was huge. And it got to the point where the government was sent in to essentially retaliate against the protesters. And, unfortunately, there were a lot of deaths. There's a lot of death, and one of the biggest iconic photos, and it's an iconic photo for protesting in general, but it's the person against the tank, where essentially there was one person standing against a tank, and it's the number 1 FU picture to the government. I mean, when I think about standing up to tyranny, I think that's like one of the most iconic photos ever, right? Like, when you think about just iconic, legendary photos in history that have actually been taken, like we just had one happen with Donald Trump putting his fist in the air after he got shot. That's an iconic photo. A lot of Americans saw that and was like, wow, like someone he's standing up against potential assassination attempts, left or right. Nobody wants a presidential candidate to be assassinated. Everyone frowns upon it. Even the Joe Biden administration frowned upon an attempt like that. And that photo really encapsulated a lot of things currently for Americans fighting against attacking political opponents. So transition to this, where it's a person standing in front of a tank, basically saying, "I will die for my right," not just as a Chinese citizen, but I think all of humanity can resonate with that. Nobody wants to feel like their government has their boot on their neck. So I think, and I'm not going to go into the deep dynamics of that protest. You're more than welcome to do your own research. We could even probably do a pod on that one day. It's such a good story. But like I said, the Tiananmen Square protest, great protest, happened in Beijing, China. Third, I didn't give a specific location in China. China's huge. Third is the Salt March in 1930. One of the most prominent things that Gandhi did essentially was he started with a very small group in India, where they were. I'm trying to find exactly where it was. Okay, so the start of it. So he started with 78 followers. So the start of it was along the coastal. No, from Sabarmati Ashram to the coastal village of Dandi. It was a 240-mile march. And essentially, he started with 78 people, and it got to thousands and thousands of people as he walked those 240 miles. And it wasn't just a walk in the park march or a really long march. They were met with legitimate oppression, legitimate like local law enforcement that was beating them and sending people to the hospital, as well as Gandhi was incarcerated after this march. And he was essentially fighting against British rule that made the tax on salt a huge economic problem for the people in India. For those of you who don't know, I assume everyone knows, but in case you don't, salt, outside of the fact that it makes food taste good, it's very vital to the health of people, as well as the fact that this definitely created political reform in India. Very important concept. And so next on the list,
Say the number.
Number 4, storming of the Bastille. Number 3 was Salt March. Number 4, storming of the Bastille. Now, Teo's a Frenchman. He may want to add some things, but essentially things weren't going well in France in 1789. There was a lot of corruption. Louis XVI was in power. The people of France were upset with, again, going on what Teo's talking about, corruption, but also huge disparity between the upper class and the lower class. And essentially, the Bastille was where there were a lot of political prisoners as well as weaponry stored there. And it was a sign of the power of King Louis XVI. And a huge mob of about, I think it was like 1,000 people, maybe more. You can correct me if you're in the comments. But a mob came up to the Bastille and essentially pressured the guards because they recognized, oh, we cannot defend this castle from this mob. And they stormed it. And I believe they killed a majority of the soldiers, if not everybody. They freed prisoners and then they took weapons. And it was the start of the French Revolution. Number five, we have, hold on, let me grab my notes. The Battle of Boyaca. So essentially, if you don't know, Simon Bolivar, he was there's a few different words, but essentially he was a liberator for South America. He battled in Venezuela. He battled in Colombia. I believe he battled in Bolivia as well. But the Battle of Boyaca was the decisive battle that freed Colombia. And he took, Simon Bolivar took the opportunity he got from Napoleon invading Spain to be able to attack Colombia and free the people who were indigenous to the area and able to free those people. The battle was very interesting because he was able to catch his enemies who had a very solid position. He was able to catch them by surprise. It was one of these battles where it just shifted the landscape of South America, and it created Colombia as we see it today. So those are my 5 events for people/movements of standing against tyranny.
When you were going through that, you know what I think is interesting? I think the number one way to stop corrupt governments from growing or becoming a thing is the unity of the people. When you talk about those things, I think when you start to see a united country, they don't stand for as much BS as a divided country. I think when you start to see corrupt governments in play, what they like to do is they like to separate and divide their people. The number one thing that scares a corrupt government is a united front against them. And I think there's been a lot of times where you can see examples all over the world of that happening, where the government is scared of its own people because they know they're not cutting up to what they should be doing, and they don't want the people to realize it. So they divide them and they distract them, and they, as opposed to focusing on what the government should be doing, which is taking care of its people, it's so focused on retaining its power that it will actually start doing things against its citizens to make sure they're not united and able to stand against them. I think when you get too far on a corrupt government, the government stops serving the people and starts serving itself. And I think that's the thing that every American should be working towards, is making sure that we're all coming together, we're all looking at what's happening in the world, how things really are operating, not what we're being told, not what the media is telling us, not any of that crap. Let's all really come together and understand what's going on in this world and make sure that we are a United States of America, united as one group working towards one goal. We've kind of lost that in America, where we're all together. It seems like we're divided in so many different ways, whether it's left, right, by race, by religion, by all of these things. They're trying to divide Americans because I genuinely think that any ill actor out there doesn't want to see a group of Americans coming together and united. Now, what's best for the country is that. What we should be doing is that. I think the best America possible is a united America. Like when we're always talking about, how do we fix America? How do we make America better? How do we fix our problems? I don't know if I have the answer for all of those things, but I do know that Americans coming together, looking around and saying, we're going to agree on what we want next, and we are going to make sure that happens and not let other people or other government agencies or other politicians get in the way. The American people are going to decide what's next for America. I think that's a successful America. I think that's an America that actually gets things done again and actually makes the world respect us again. But we're not doing that. And I'm not saying that it's all because of corruption. I think there's a lot of different things that are happening. But if the government isn't actively supporting in that mission, we need to critically look at the government and say, what could you be doing better? And how could you be supporting Americans as opposed to dividing them? That's just my personal thought.
Yeah, I agree. Don't have much to add.
Me neither.
That encapsulates a lot of good ideas. Good ideas. Love that. Well, we have a fantasy draft.
Wrapping it up with the fantasy draft. We haven't had one in a few episodes.
Yeah, let's get a fantasy draft in there. Everybody loves our fantasy drafts.
What is the title of this fantasy draft?
Top 5 books fantasy draft.
All right, give it a good intro.
Okay, welcome to 2024's top 5 books fantasy draft. And Taylor, you want to get first?
No, you can have first pick. I had first pick last time.
Do I get first pick?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. You know what? I'm gonna go with Rich Dad Poor Dad, the old classic. Rich Dad Poor Dad, wonderful book. I think, especially if you're an American, you need to read that book. Talks a lot about some concepts. Has started a lot of entrepreneurs onto their entrepreneur mindset. And it's just a great book. I think even if you don't want to become an entrepreneur, it's just a great book to read. There are a lot of stories that I think are timeless lessons you can always not just take and encapsulate into your thinking, but also pass on to the next generation. So Rich Dad, Poor Dad, first pick.
I think you left a big one on the table. My first pick in the top 5 books of all time, I'm going to go the Bible. I think it is the greatest book ever written. It is, it is a spiritual journey. It is a practical journey. It is the book that if everyone read, I think the world would actually come more together. It's where we all should be putting our hearts, our minds, and our spirits. And to start out with the Bible with the second pick, I am very happy with the start of my draft.
Wow, I lost. Okay.
I'll open up the door to you. I'll give you another one. The second greatest book of all time, in my opinion, is The Brothers Karamazov, and it is written by Dostoevsky. Now, how do you say that? It is written by Dostoevsky. The Brothers Karamazov. I said it already. And it really is, like, if you haven't read it, he's an author that has had pretty much like is in argument for one of the greatest authors of all time, and has had some of the greatest books of all time. But of his writings, and I haven't read them all, that is my second book.
Okay. My second book is Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. I think it's one of the most important books for any person to read, especially if you're in a place in life where you don't have a lot of self-esteem, or you're somebody who you have a very daunting goal or task ahead of you that you need motivation, as well as perspective on like what is a hard life and how much your life can change. And also just like recognizing that your destiny is your own. David Goggins is inspiration to a lot of people, me included, when he talks about his struggle from being overweight and at a dead-end job to becoming a Navy SEAL to ultra-marathon runner to just a hardcore badass. So that's my second pick. And then my third pick, I'm going to go with Animal Farm. I think Animal Farm is one of the most important books Americans should read because it goes over the scariness. It's funny, it's in line with our podcast, but the scariness and the evil and the slippery slope of a communist regime or just a tyrannical government in general. They do a very good job of bringing this. It's an easy digestible book when you come to read it. High schoolers can read it, middle schoolers can read it, and you can always get the gist. I remember reading in high school, reading it as an adult, and resonated with me in high school, resonated with me way more as an adult. Great book, George Orwell, great author. And I don't know if I shouted out for the Rich Dad Poor Dad, but that was by Robert Kiyosaki. So just did 3, so now you get 2 more.
All right. With my third pick, I'm going to go, and it's a bit cheating, but the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I think that in terms of fictional books, it is the greatest story ever told beginning to end, and I think it's one of the most entertaining ones that you can think of. It takes you on a journey, and to me, like, there's nothing like that first time you go through it, and they have movies that go with it too, so you can do that, but the books, in my opinion, far outdo the movies, and the movies are great, but to me, it's one of the greatest book trilogies or series of all time. With my fourth one, I'm going to go The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. I think this should be mandatory reading for everyone all over the world, but in terms of understanding how economies work, which is how the world operates, the fact that people don't understand this makes a lot of sense. I understand why people would say taxing unrealized gains is a good idea because I know they haven't read The Wealth of Nations. And I just think that it's foundational for society to understand how it works. So 4th greatest book of all time. The fact that he could get economics in one book, I think it's something everyone should read. Okay. You got number 5.
I'm at 4.
Oh, you're at number 4. Yeah.
I'm at number. Oh no.
Yeah, you got 4 and 5.
No, I'm at 4. Oh no. So I got one more pick.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. I got one pick. Okay, my last pick.
No, you did 2, 3, and that's just 4, 5.
No, because I've done Rich Dad Poor Dad. Oh no, you're right. I've done 3. I've done Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Yeah, you get 4, 5.
Can't Hurt Me. Okay, I got 4 and 5. So I didn't know we could do a whole series. So now that we're gonna do a whole series, I'm gonna beat your list now because I'm going Harry Potter series. I didn't know we were doing fiction. I had it in the back pocket in case Taylor wanted to go fiction. We didn't talk about going fiction. I'm cool with that. I'm throwing the Harry Potter series. Love Lord of the Rings. Love the movies more than love the books for Lord of the Rings. But for Harry Potter, other way around, love the books more than I love the movies. And that's an easy 4. And to be honest, when it comes to the books, I'm much more, and I read all the Lord of the Rings. I didn't read The Hobbit. I just didn't read The Hobbit. But I read all of Lord of the Rings, the trilogy, and I read all 7 Harry Potter books. And I'm actually going to go see Harry Potter, the play in New York next weekend. The new one that came out or whatever. But that being said, Harry Potter, best series I ever had. I read the 7th book in one day. Such a good series.
You did not read the 7th book in one day. Eugene, fact check if it's physically possible to read
I read it.
the 7th book in one day.
I read it.
You're a liar. You're a liar on
I
the
read it in
podcast.
one
You're
day.
lying to the 7,000
remember
subscribers.
reading that book.
That is impossible.
It's not
the
impossible.
7th book is the
It's like,
longest
it's
book.
like 800 or 900 pages. Something
You read
crazy.
900
I read
pages
it.
in one day
Yeah.
as a child.
100%.
What grade?
I believe I was in, it was either 8th grade summer or 9th grade. But I remember,
I knew you in
you know-
8th grade or 9th grade. You didn't read it in one day.
I did.
No way.
I did.
Did not.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Anyways, I read it.
Not.
I read it one day.
You're such
You know
a
how I
liar.
know I read it in one day? Because I was working at my dad's restaurant, and I read it in one day. I was reading like crazy.
You were reading it in one day while you worked at your
I
dad's
was
restaurant?
reading in between.
If you had said, I woke up at 4 a.m. and read
I was
till 12
crushing that
p.m.,
book.
I would
I'm a
say
fast
you didn't
reader.
even do that.
I'm also a fast
If you
reader.
think you're reading that book in between buffing tables in one day, you're a bold-faced
I
liar.
was washing dishes, and we had a slow day.
The 7th Harry Potter book, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what I'm seeing is one person said that's not possible. Another person says it would take 10 hours. The book's 759 pages.
Easy work.
Not 198,000 words.
Crushed it.
Okay, let's move on because I
This is
can't
gonna
deal
be
with
real.
I can't deal with the lies.
This is gonna be real.
I can't deal with I cannot deal with the lies.
We're gonna get your take. I'm gonna have listen. If you read the Harry Potter series, one day comment on this. We need that comment.
Comment if you think it's physically possible for anyone to read the 7th book in one day, and then comment if you think Miguel in 9th grade read the whole book in one day in between shifts at a restaurant.
Listen, it was a slow day.
Slow
I was
day
at
at the restaurant.
dishwasher. There wasn't a lot of dishes. I
Wow.
was reading it in the back. You know.
I think you got the Cliff Notes version and said I read the thing, man.
I was reading the 7th book. I was hyped when it came out.
Okay, and what's your last and final book?
This one's hard.
Yeah, it does get hard here.
You know what? This is crazy that this made it to my top 5. But I'm gonna put it in there. I'm gonna go because I feel like you're gonna use the other book I was gonna choose for your 5th. So it'll be interesting. We should do a bonus pick. Regardless,
Let's go.
I'll do 5.
Come on.
5, The Richest Man in Babylon by George Clason. Also, Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling. Shout out J.K. Rowling. If you ever want to come on the pod.
Okay. My 5th pick, we weren't going to have a conflict. I don't think you've read this one. Maybe you have. It's called The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. Really good book. Makes you think a lot about who you are and how you just look at the world, how you treat yourself, all of that. Not going to give too much of a spoiler, just that it made it into my top 5 books. It's a recent read, and it's that good to me. And I think honestly, all 5 of them should be mandatory reading for my list and your list. Every book said here, every person should read at least once.
I'm going to take back my pick now.
Nope, too late in the books. No, we
taking it
can't
back-
do that. That's
Yeah,
not how this
I'm gonna
works.
Take it back. For the 5th pick, you can always take it back. If the person didn't choose the other one you thought they were going to choose. Anyways, I'm taking it back. Going with Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. There we go.
You gonna say anything about this surprise new 5th?
I thought you were going to pick it. It's a great book. It's a great book in terms
Not
of
top 5
negotiating.
books of all time.
In my opinion. Thank you. My opinion is it's a great book talking about negotiation. It has amazing stories in it, as well as like I'm somebody who I'm always working on negotiating because it's a talent that can be worked on and sharpened. And it was like one of the first books you recommended it to me. It was one of the first books that I read that I was like, oh man, like this is something you can really work on. And he talks a lot about getting uncomfortable. A lot of the principles in that book I still use today and I still think about.
I agree.
So shout out to him. Shout out to Chris Voss.
Anyone else you want to shout out before we wrap this up? There's one individual I can think of.
I want to shout out the Pope. Shout out the Pope.
All right, brother. Good
All right,
episode.
brother.